it's Katie and I'm back with another video. For today's video, I'm going to be explaining to you guys what the Trampoline R&C is, which stands for Range and Conditioning. So let's go. R&C stands for Range and Conditioning, which basically is how flexible and how strong you are. Now this is used within the trampoline DMT and tumbling system for the lower levels from NDP 1 through to NDP 6 in order to qualify through to the high level NDP competitions. Now what happens is the gymnasts will perform this routine and they have to score 75% or higher in order to actually qualify themselves through. So they could be amazing on the trampoline or amazing on the DMT, but if they fail their R&C then they can't progress on to the higher competitions. So it's really important that you pass your R&C. So this routine contains a bunch of flexibility and strength skills which are performed one after each other, and I'm going to be showing you what they are and where the deductions come in. So the start of the R&C is a forward roll into a dish position. Now when you do your forward roll, you want to make sure that you start off with your arms by your ears and not with your arms out in front of you, because otherwise you'll get a deduction for that. When you do your forward roll, you want to make sure that you control your speed. So you don't want to roll really fast like this. You want to roll controlled and land in a dish. You also want to make sure that in your dish, your legs aren't bent and that they're nice and straight, and that your toes are pointed and not flexed. Also, the final point is that before you go into your V-sits, that you hold for 2 seconds. So the next part of the R&C is the 4 alternate leg V-sits. The deduction for this part of the R&C is when you start your V-sits, you must start with your arms up by your ears and not out in front of you. The next 2 deductions are when you do your V-sits, you have to ensure that you have straight legs and pointed toes. So you shouldn't do them like this. The next deduction comes when you don't return to the original position. So after you do each V-sit, you have to make sure that you go back to the dish with your arms up by your ears. And the final deduction is that if you don't touch your toes in the V-sit, then you will be deducted. So you have to reach up and touch your toes rather than swinging past like that. The next part is the back support. The first deduction comes if when you do your back support, if your hands aren't facing forwards and they're facing backwards like this, then you'll be deducted. The next deduction is that you have to hold the back support for 2 seconds, and if you don't, then you'll be deducted. The third point is that you have to make sure that your hips are in line with the rest of your body. So when you do your back support, you can't be sitting down like this. You have to ensure that you squeeze your butt basically and hold it in line with the rest of your body. And the final 2 points, like on the rest of them, is that you have to keep your knees straight and your toes pointed so that you're not like this. So the next part of the R&C is the straddle fold. Now there are a possible 6 deductions in this part of the routine. So the first part is that you have to make sure that your toes are pointed, not your knees. Your toes are pointed and that your knees are straight throughout. You also have to make sure that you hold it for 2 seconds and that you keep your arms in line with your torso, so the rest of your body. So when you do your straddle fold, don't reach out like this. You have to keep your arms up by your ears and fold down. Okay. Now in this next bit, there are possible 2 deductions. So if you have your straddle fold flat to the floor, then you'll get no deductions. If you are between 45 degrees and the floor, well, if you're between 45 degrees and not touching the floor, then you'll only get 1 deduction. However, if you can only straddle fold to about here, then you're going to get 2 deductions. So, here is no deduction. Between here and the floor is 1-ish. And then between here and here. Next comes the pike fold. So in this one, there are possible 5 deductions. The first one is if you have your feet flexed, so you want to make sure you have your toes pointed throughout. The second one is your knees. You want to make sure you keep your knees straight, because if they bend, then you'll get a deduction. The next one, again, like in the straddle fold, is a possible 2. So it requires that your chest presses against your thighs. So if your chest presses against your thighs like this, then you'll have no deduction. But if your chest is near your thighs, like this, then you'll have a 0.1 deduction. However, if you are, I don't know how to describe this. So if you're between here and 45 degrees, then like in the straddle fold, you get a 2 deduction. And the final one is if you don't hold it for 2 seconds, then you get a deduction. So it's really important that for each skill that you do, you hold it for 2 seconds throughout. So the next part of the routine is the splits. Now with the splits, you don't get judged on both, you get judged together. So if you have a really good left leg splits, for example, but a not so great right leg splits, you'll still receive the same deduction as someone who has not great splits altogether. So for the splits, you want to make sure that you have pointed toes, because that's 1 deduction, that your knees are straight, because that's another deduction, that your hips are flat on the floor, because if your hips, for example, are like, or I can't even do it on this leg, aren't on the floor, my hips are on the floor. I don't know how to describe this. If your hips are not on the floor, then you will receive a deduction. Arms. The next deduction comes with the arms. So when you do your splits, you either want to have your arms straight out to the side or one arm forwards and one arm backwards. I think it's easier to split that side. And the final deduction comes with your hips. If your hips are wonky when you do your splits, you will receive a deduction. Whereas if your hips are straight. So the next part of the R&C comes the arch, which is the opposite to dish. So when you do your arch hold, you want to make sure that your arms are really straight, because if they're not, then you get a deduction. You also need to make sure that your legs are straight, because if your legs aren't straight, then you'll also get a deduction. You need to make sure that your toes are pointed, because if your toes aren't pointed, then like your arms and legs, you'll also get a deduction. You also need to make sure that in your arch, your arms and your legs are the same amount lifted off the floor. So you can't, for example, do your arch like this, and you can't do your arch like this. Your arms and legs have to be equal off the floor. And the final deduction comes if you don't hold your arch for 2 seconds. Next comes the press up position. Now it's really important in this part that you do everything correctly, because if you mess up one bit, then you're quite likely to mess up the other parts and get the maximum deductions. So the first part is that when you press up, you actually press up. So from your lying down position, you want to do one swift movement of a press up. You don't want to kind of just like lift yourself up off the floor. So that comes as the first deduction. The next deduction comes if your body is not in a straight line. So if you don't press up in one position, then your body's not going to be in a straight line. But you also need to make sure that you stay tight, so that you don't come up in an arch position or like this, because your body's not going to be in line. The next part comes is if you bend your legs. So you have to keep your legs straight the whole way through the press up. Also, if your head is not in line with your body, so as you press up, make sure your head stays in line and that it doesn't stick out like this. And then the final deduction comes if you don't hold for 2 seconds and maintain your shape. So if you press up really nicely and then relax and don't hold the shape, then you'll get a deduction. The second to last part of the R&C is the squat to vertical jump. Now I'll demonstrate what it is. Oh God, I'll do that then. Okay. So the first deduction comes when you do your squat in, you have to make sure that your knees stay together. So if you squat and your knees were apart like this, then you'll get a deduction. The second deduction comes is if you don't jump. So for example, if you just squat in and then stand up, you get a deduction because you haven't jumped. You also have to make sure that when you jump, that you jump straight up into the air and you don't jump forwards, sideways or backwards, because that also comes as a deduction. Yeah. When you land your jump, you have to make sure that you bend your knees and absorb the landing, because otherwise that's a deduction. And the final deduction comes is when you jump, if you swing your arms forwards or out to the side, then you get deducted. You have to make sure your arms stay up by your ears for the whole time. The final part of the R&C is the shoulder flexibility, which looks like this. So the first deduction comes if you don't do the shoulder flexibility. So if you hold your arms in front of your head for the whole time, that's not shoulder flexibility. The second deduction comes is if you bend your arms like this, because that again is not shoulder flexibility. The third deduction comes is actually if you push your arms back too much. So you have to make sure that your arms don't go any further back than 45 degrees. The fourth deduction comes is if you don't keep your body straight. So you have to ensure that your body stays straight the whole time and that you don't do this, because again, that's not shoulder flexibility. And the final deduction comes is if you don't hold it for 2 seconds. Make sure that you hold it for 2 seconds. Thank you guys so much for watching my video today. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I hope this video was also useful to some of you if you're doing NDP, but yeah, if not, I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys with another video later. Bye. I don't know why I said later. On Sunday. Bye.